Hi class. What you're about to see is a video of a slab foundation being poured. It was filmed in the fall of 2008 with my building construction class, and it goes through all the stages that would be done for setting up, pouring concrete, and finishing flat work. Now, unfortunately, students held the camera the entire time, so it's not the best shot, but it will go through stage by stage, and I'll do a little voiceover for you to kind of explain what's going on and why it's happening. This is going to help you understand the concrete foundation for a slab much better and give you a pretty good idea of how it happens.
So here we are at a job site. What you're looking at, that board there, is one of our forms, and we're currently getting ready to set up all 4 forms for our slab. So what's really helpful is having a big Bobcat like this one with a bucket attachment, because you can move a whole lot of dirt in a short period of time. Without one of these, you got a bunch of people with shovels, and it could take quite a long time. So they have one form set up along the far wall, I guess you could call it, and here they're getting ready to set up along the back. So what you're looking at here is one of the workers is bringing over a tape measure. What they're doing is measuring diagonal corners, just like you guys have been taught in class to do. It's simply just using the Pythagorean theorem, and that's what he is explaining right now. So we have a 22 by 30 foot garage slab. So we'd square 22, we'd square 30, we'd add them together, we'd take the square root, and we're going to find what the diagonal corner needs to be. Now here we got some of my students getting involved, and what they're doing is doing a little backfill along the outside of the forms. What this is doing is it's making it so the concrete is not going to move the forms out, and if it does, it's going to move it little. Here they're just skimming off just a little bit of dirt in between the footing and the slab. By taking off that radius, or creating a radius, I should say, it just has less of a chance of cracking. So here we are. They're digging out the footing for the front of the building, and they're putting it in. And if you haven't figured it out yet, we move pretty quick in here just to try to give you the highlights of it. So here, measuring it out, making sure it's 22 feet, so everything is square, and then we're good. Now the video also bounces around a little bit, as sometimes a lot is going on at once. Here they're getting ready to set up rebar. So they're in that first footing, where the deepest, widest part of your foundation, where it supports the entire weight of the structure. And they have these pre-made little pieces of rebar that we stick in the ground. They're kind of like giant horseshoes. What it's going to do is get the rebar off of the ground, so it's kind of right in the middle of your footing. What this does is it helps make your concrete much stronger and keeps it tied together in that area of the footing where all that weight of the entire structure is coming down. So this is a neat tool that they have. Rebar is simply just a 1/2 inch or 5/8 inch diameter steel rod. And by using a lever, they can bend it to 90 degrees so they can place it in corners. And they put a couple of rows of rebar down, just like that, spread them out a little bit. And then soon they're going to tie them down, and then we're going to be ready for wire mesh and then concrete. So they just kind of rest on there, they overlap, and they go in the footings. Now here they have a really cool cordless tool. You're not going to find this one at your Menards or your Home Depot, but what it does is it shoots out a little strand of wire and ties the rebar together. When I talked to the crew when they were doing this in 2008, it was a $1,500 tool. Not something you would really ever own or need unless you did this professionally, but the alternative to this tool is tying everything off by hand. So you can see how this would save an hour, maybe an hour and a half of just one guy constantly tying everything off. And that's what it looks like in the end. shoots out wire, wraps it around, ties it nice and tight. It's a pretty cool deal. So here, this is called a compactor. What this does is you put this over, you kind of push it like a lawnmower over where your slab is going to go, and it just compacts the earth. Now, although my student is pushing that pretty easily, it actually weighs about 150 pounds, but because it's vibrating right on top of the slab, you can actually push it fairly easily. You need to make sure you compact everything down so you don't get any loose spots, because then your concrete has a tendency to crack. Here's wire mesh. Comes in a roll. You mark out what lengths you need. You cut it to length, and then you put that down on top of your slab. They've already done that. You'll get to see some of that in a little bit. Then the concrete truck comes. We got all of the forms up. We got the rebar in. We got the wire mesh ready to go. Now they just bring in different extensions to the boom, depending on what is needed for the job. And then they're ready to get started. So in this case, they realize that they don't need that piece, throw it back on the truck, and they're ready to go. So as you're watching the video, if you're noticing that there's a lot of people standing around, it's simply because my students are out there with them. We're going to talk about those in a little bit. So normally a concrete crew would be 3 to 5 people. And then once the concrete comes, work gets pretty intense. You got to work really fast. As you can see, everybody inside the slab is wearing rubber boots. Kind of a must, kind of a mandatory. So here the driver has the controls, and he just kind of pours it where the crew wants it. So these guys have their rakes and shovels. They're pushing the concrete towards the corners and the footings. You'll also see them lift up the wire mesh to try to get it in between the concrete. If it just rests on the bottom, it doesn't do its job. So it is kind of a challenge though, because you're constantly walking on it. So ideally you want it right in the center, but sometimes that's not always the case. You try to do the best you can with it. So there you can see the driver move his boom out of the way. He doesn't want to get too far ahead of the workers, otherwise the concrete will start to harden before they're ready, and that creates an issue. So he has a switch in the truck, and he can turn it on or off. He can move his boom around left or right, and he's just pouring the load as needed. So he can speed it up, he can slow it down, much like I did in this video. And what you're seeing over here is we got people already starting to trowel or along the outside edges with their hand trowels. Again, troweling is all about making a nice, flat, smooth, dense area. The limitation is it's a handheld tool and you can only get about an arm's length. Now what they're bringing in here is called a power screed. You guys got to do screeding for your own project where we used a board and kind of shimmied it back and forth. This is kind of like a weed whacker with a long board attachment, and it just vibrates on top of the concrete. What he's doing is resting on the outside form and then this little steel bar that you guys saw earlier in the concrete. They're eventually going to move that bar, but it allows him to rest on that bar, which is set to the exact same height as the top of the forms. This way, your slab isn't going to dip or rise in the middle. Now you can see the guys behind them. If they feel that the concrete is a little less, they're going to push a little more up towards the screed. If they feel there's too much, they're going to rake it back like he's doing there. What you see here are anchor bolts. Anchor bolts are installed or placed in the concrete to hold structural members in place. For the slab, that means our future walls. So how they work is they are going to be placed in the concrete while it's still wet. You want to make sure they're going to land exactly where your 2x4s or your 2x6s are going to be placed. And then you want to make sure they're up high enough so they're going to go through the 2x4, and then you have enough space for a washer and a nut. The idea is that you just have enough concrete so that screed can level it out. Although it looks smooth, it is simply just leveling out. And then the driver is going to finish up what he has in the load. There they're moving that steel bar back for when the next truck comes. This was a 2-truck load is what they needed. So one truck comes, empties out all its contents, and then the next one should show up right after. Sometimes they're even waiting on the street for the one truck to leave so they can go. Here we have one of my students simply just shoveling some concrete and throwing it to where that pipe was, and then they're going to screed over that as they go. So one of the crazy things is as soon as it's poured, the concrete is in a process of hardening. Now, it's not able to be walked on just yet, but it isn't going to take more than an hour for humans to walk on it and not fall through. So here, we're just kind of showing the process of troweling again. So you kind of trowel before, you kind of trowel after. You keep troweling until it's perfect. Here, the second truck came. We're filling in that area. We're screeding again. We're moving things around. And we're just making sure that we have enough concrete to do what we need to do, fill in that area, and not a whole lot extra. So he's going to screed all the way up to the end, and then we're ready for some future steps. There we go. Doing a little bit more troweling. Beautiful. Again, sorry for the filming. 2008, we didn't have the cell phone cameras, and you guys are way better at filming than the old group. What they are doing here is they're mapping out for where the garage door is going to go. What you don't want is a nice 90-degree edge for where your garage door is going to go, because as you drive over it, it's going to crack. So they like to map that out and kind of make that a little bit rounded over or even beveled. Now, one of the last steps is using this power trowel. Now, this is only about 2 hours after the concrete was poured. And although it looks like that fan on that is moving really slow, it's actually moving really fast. The camera just doesn't capture it. But you can see where he steps leaves a mark, but where that fan goes leaves it nice and smooth. So you just kind of start in one corner and you slowly work your way back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, until you essentially just work your way off of the slab. Here's a larger photo of that. And then it doesn't take too long before you're already digging it out and taking your forms off. This is only about 2.5 hours after the concrete is poured. And here they're setting up the approach leading up to the garage. So there's going to be more concrete poured leading up to that garage slab. Here they're running some chalk lines so they know exactly where to snap a line. And there you can see how they changed it, changed that 90-degree corner for where the garage door is going to go. So when you drive over it, it doesn't want to crack. So more wire mesh, roll it out, flip it over, put it in place, and then they're ready to pour the approach. Now, what was interesting about this is it was getting close to lunchtime, so my students and I went out for lunch. We were gone for about 45 minutes. And when we came back, they already had this poured. And what they're doing here is they're brushing it. Now, for the slab, we did this power trowel to make it really smooth. But because this concrete is going to be outdoors, it has to have a brushed finish on it. Any concrete that's outdoors has to have a brushed finish on it. Otherwise, when it rains, it becomes incredibly slippery and it's tough to walk on.